Rain poured down like someone had turned on a giant faucet in the sky. The kind of rain that soaks you through in seconds, no matter how fast you run. It was already dark, past 9 in the evening, and the streets were nearly empty. Yuki pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down the sidewalk. Her feet ached in her old sneakers. She'd just finished another double shift at the Golden Lotus Diner, 12 hours of carrying heavy trays, forcing smiles at rude customers, and pretending the pain in her back didn't exist. Her hands still smelled like grease and cheap dish soap no matter how many times she'd scrubbed them, but she couldn't complain. Not really. The money from today would cover half of Grandma's medication this month. Maybe if she picked up that extra Sunday shift that nobody wanted, she could finally fix the leak in their apartment ceiling before winter really set in. Yuki was so lost in her thoughts, calculating bills in her head like she did every night, that she almost walked right past the park. Almost. But something made her look up. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was just luck. Either way, she saw her. A little girl sat alone on a park bench, completely drenched. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her small body was hunched over, shoulders shaking. Even from a distance, Yuki could see she was crying. Yuki stopped walking. She looked around, expecting to see a parent or guardian nearby. Nobody. The park was empty except for them. Just dark trees swaying in the wind and rain drumming on the metal slide across the pathway. Every responsible part of Yuki's brain told her to keep walking. She was exhausted. She was soaked. She had to get home to check on Grandma. Getting involved in other people's problems never ended well for people like her. She'd learned that the hard way, but the girl looked so small. So scared. Yuki sighed and walked toward the bench. As she got closer, she could see the child was wearing expensive clothes. A designer coat that probably cost more than Yuki made in 3 months. Shiny black shoes that definitely weren't meant for playing in puddles. Even her little backpack had some fancy brand logo Yuki didn't recognize. "Hey there," Yuki said softly, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears and rain. Her eyes were wide and terrified. But she didn't answer. She just stared at Yuki with this heartbreaking expression of pure fear. "It's all right." Yuki tried again, keeping her voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help. Can you tell me your name?" Still nothing. The girl's mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. That's when Yuki noticed the way the girl was breathing. Quick, shallow breaths, panic. She'd seen enough anxiety attacks at the diner to recognize one starting. Okay, Yuki said quickly, sitting down on the bench beside her. She made sure to leave some space between them, not wanting to scare the child more. "You don't have to talk." "That's fine. Just breathe with me, all right? In and out. Nice and slow." Yuki exaggerated her own breathing, making it visible. The girl watched her and slowly, very slowly, started to match the rhythm. In and out. In and out. They sat like that for a few minutes, just breathing together in the rain. Yuki grabbed the small umbrella from her bag and held it over both of them. It wasn't much, already half broken, but it was something. "Better?" Yuki asked. The girl nodded. "Just a tiny movement, but it was something." "Good, that's really good." Yuki smiled at her. "Now, I know you might not be able to tell me what's wrong, but maybe you can show me. Do you know where you live? Can you point which direction?" The girl shook her head. More tears. Yuki's heart squeezed. This poor kid was completely lost, and something else was going on too. The way she wasn't talking. The way she'd only nodded and shook her head. It wasn't just fear or shyness. "Can you speak?" Yuki asked gently. "It's okay if you can't. I just need to know so I can help you better." The girl's face crumpled. She shook her head again, and this time she pointed to her throat. Then she made a gesture like closing a lock with a key. Understanding hit Yuki like a wave. This little girl couldn't speak. And she was lost, alone and terrified in the rain. "Oh, sweetheart," Yuki whispered. She wanted to hug the child but didn't want to overwhelm her. "That must be so scary right now. But listen to me, okay? We're going to figure this out together. I promise I won't leave you alone." The girl looked at Yuki with such hope in her eyes that it almost broke her heart. Yuki pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked and the battery was at 15%, but it still worked. "I'm going to call the police, okay? Not because you're in trouble, but because they can help us find your family. Does that sound all right?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. As Yuki dialed, the girl suddenly grabbed her free hand. Her small fingers were ice cold and trembling. Yuki squeezed back gently, trying to send some warmth and comfort through that simple touch. While she waited for someone to answer, Yuki noticed a car parked across the street. Sleek, black, expensive looking, the kind of car that definitely didn't belong in this neighborhood. The windows were tinted so she couldn't see inside, but something about it felt odd. Had it been there the whole time? Before she could think more about it, the dispatcher answered. Yuki explained the situation as calmly as she could. Yes, she'd found a lost child. No, the girl couldn't tell her anything because she appeared to be mute. Yes, she'd stay with her until help arrived. After hanging up, Yuki tucked her phone away and focused back on the girl. They're sending someone to help. But until then, you're stuck with me. Is that okay? The girl nodded again, and this time there was the tiniest hint of a smile. Good, because honestly, sitting in the rain wasn't my first choice for tonight. But the company's not bad. Yuki winked, and the girl's smile grew just a little bigger. They sat together under the broken umbrella, waiting. Yuki started talking about random things to distract the child from her fear. She talked about the funny customer who'd ordered pancakes at dinner time and insisted they tasted different than breakfast pancakes. She talked about her grandma's terrible singing voice and how she sang anyway, every single morning. She even made up a silly story about the grumpy cat that lived in their apartment building, who she swore was actually a tiny lion in disguise. The girl didn't laugh out loud, but her eyes brightened. She started making small gestures, pointing at things, using her hands to communicate. Yuki did her best to understand, nodding and responding even when she wasn't completely sure what the girl meant. Across the street, in that expensive black car, someone was watching. Watching as a poor, exhausted waitress sat in the pouring rain with a lost child she didn't know. Watching as she shared her barely functioning umbrella and gave her time, her warmth, her kindness without asking for anything in return. But Yuki had no idea she was being watched. She had no idea that this simple act of human decency was being noticed by someone who could change her entire life. She just knew that a scared little girl needed someone, and right now that someone was her. And sometimes that's how the most important moments in our lives begin. Not with fanfare or warning, but with a simple choice to stop and help when we could have just walked away. The police arrived within 20 minutes. A kind officer asked if Yuki would come to the station since the little girl wouldn't let go of her hand. Yuki thought about her grandmother waiting at home, about her early morning shift. But one look at those pleading eyes and she agreed. At the station, things moved quickly. The girl's face was already on a missing person alert. Her name was Sophie Chen, daughter of Alexander Chen, CEO of Chen Industries. Within minutes, a man burst through the doors like a hurricane. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Yuki's entire year of rent. His hair was messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes were wild with worry until they landed on his daughter. Sophie, he breathed out, and the relief in his voice was so raw it hurt to hear. Sophie let go of Yuki's hand for the first time and ran to her father. He dropped to his knees and wrapped her in his arms, holding her like he'd never let go. Yuki watched them, feeling suddenly out of place in this reunion between father and daughter. "Thank you," the man said, looking up at Yuki with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for finding her, for staying with her." "I just did what anyone would do," Yuki said quietly. "No." His voice was firm. "Not everyone would. Most people would have just kept walking." Before Yuki could respond, an officer asked her to give a statement about how she'd found Sophie. She explained everything quickly, just the facts, nothing special. By the time she was done, Alexander Chen was finishing up with another officer, and Sophie was wrapped in a blanket drinking hot chocolate. Yuki figured that was her cue to leave. She started toward the door, but a small hand grabbed her jacket. Sophie was there looking up at her with those same scared eyes from the park. She made a gesture with her hands, bringing them together over her heart. "She's saying thank you," Alexander Chen said softly, coming up behind his daughter, "and she wants to know if she'll see you again." Yuki's throat felt tight. "Tell her she's very brave, and tell her to be careful out there, okay?" She left before they could say anything else. Before the emotion bubbling in her chest could spill over, she had to get home, had to get back to her real life. But Alexander Chen stood in that police station, watching through the window, as a soaking wet waitress disappeared into the rainy night. He turned to his assistant, who'd arrived minutes after him. "Find out everything about her," he said quietly. "Her name, where she works, everything." "Sir?" His assistant looked confused. "Just do it." 3 days later, Yuki was elbow-deep in dirty dishes when her manager called her into the office. Her heart sank. In her experience, unexpected meetings with managers never meant good things. "You've got an interview," her manager said, sliding a business card across the desk. "What?" "I didn't apply anywhere, Chin Industries. Their new corporate cafeteria is hiring. They called asking specifically for you, said they got your name from a recommendation." Yuki stared at the card. Chen Industries. That name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place why. "I don't understand." "Neither do I, but that's a good company. Real good. Better pay, benefits, the works. You'd be stupid not to go." The interview was the next day. Yuki wore her only nice outfit, a simple black dress that was 3 years old and a little faded but clean. The Chen Industries building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place where Yuki usually felt invisible. The interview went surprisingly well. The hiring manager seemed more interested in her character than her limited experience. She asked weird questions like, "Tell me about a time you helped someone without expecting anything in return." And, "How do you handle stressful situations with grace?" Yuki answered honestly, never mentioning the little girl in the park. She didn't connect that Sophie's last name was Chen. She was just focused on not messing up this chance at a better job. 2 days later, she got the call. She got the job. The pay was almost double what she made at the diner. The benefits included health insurance that could actually cover her grandmother's treatments. Yuki cried when she hung up. What Yuki didn't know was that 15 floors above the cafeteria, Alexander Chen had orchestrated everything. He'd watched her interview footage 3 times, studying how she smiled genuinely at everyone, held doors open, and treated every person with respect. "She doesn't know who I am," he said to his assistant. "She has no idea Sophie is my daughter. I want to see if that kindness was real." His assistant frowned. "Sir, she stayed in the rain for 40 minutes with a stranger. She refused the reward. What more proof do you need?" Alexander was quiet. "My daughter hasn't smiled since the accident, since she lost her voice. But she smiled at this girl. If this woman is as good as she seems, I want her in our lives. Sophie needs someone real around." Over the next month, Yuki settled into her new job. She worked hard, arriving early and staying late. She learned everyone's names in the building, from the CEO's executive team to the maintenance crew. She started taking sign language classes at the community center on her lunch breaks, just free basic ones, because she couldn't stop thinking about Sophie and wishing she could have communicated better with her. Alexander brought Sophie to the office more often now, something he'd rarely done before. He'd take her down to the cafeteria for lunch, sitting at tables where he could watch Yuki work without being obvious about it. Sophie would get excited whenever she saw Yuki, tugging on her father's sleeve and pointing. The first time they accidentally ended up in Yuki's serving line, Sophie's whole face lit up. She started making excited gestures with her hands. Yuki's eyes went wide with recognition. "Sophie, oh my goodness, is that you?" Sophie nodded so hard her ponytail bounced. She was practically vibrating with happiness. "She looks so much better than that night," Yuki said, smiling. Then she looked up and froze. The man with Sophie was the same man from the police station. The father. "Wait, you're Alexander Chen," he said, extending his hand. "I don't think we properly met that night. I was a bit of a mess." "You own this building," Yuki said slowly, the pieces clicking together. "Sophie is your daughter. Did you give me this job?" "I gave you an interview," Alexander corrected. "You earned the job yourself. The hiring manager had no idea who you were to me. I made sure of that." Yuki didn't know what to say. Part of her felt grateful. Another part felt weird about it, like maybe she didn't deserve to be here. Sophie grabbed Yuki's hand across the counter, making more gestures. Her eyes were pleading. "She's asking if you're mad," Alexander translated quietly. "She's been hoping to see you again. She talks about you. Well, signs about you. All the time." Yuki looked at Sophie's hopeful face and felt her concerns melt away. "I'm not mad. I'm just surprised. And really happy to see you again, sweet girl." Sophie beamed. "She's been taking speech therapy," Alexander said. "The doctors say she might never fully recover her voice. The trauma from the accident was severe, but she's trying. She's been trying harder ever since that night she met you. Really? Really? You gave her something I couldn't. You treated her like she mattered, like her inability to speak didn't make her less than. You didn't pity her or talk down to her. Alexander's voice was thick with emotion. You just saw her. The real her. Yuki felt tears prick her eyes. She's a special kid. Anyone could see that, but not everyone did. Most people don't. Alexander paused, then said something that would change everything. I have a proposition for you. But first I need to ask, how would you feel about spending more time with Sophie? And in that moment, with Sophie squeezing her hand and looking up at her with those hopeful eyes, Yuki had no idea that her entire life was about to transform in ways she never could have imagined. All because she'd stopped in the rain to help a scared little girl. Yuki stood in the cafeteria. Aware that other employees were watching, Sophie was still holding her hand, and Alexander Chen was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. What kind of proposition? Yuki asked carefully. Not here, Alexander said, glancing around. Could you meet me in my office after your shift? Sophie was looking up at her with such hope that the word no just wouldn't come out. Okay, she finally said. I get off at 3. The rest of her shift dragged by like cold honey. Yuki messed up 2 orders because she couldn't stop thinking about what Alexander Chen could possibly want. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, her stomach was in knots. The executive floor was sleek and expensive. Sophie was in Alexander's office, sitting on a couch with a coloring book. Thank you for coming, Alexander said. Sophie needs a companion. Someone to spend time with her after school, help with homework, just be there for her. She needs someone who understands her. Someone patient and kind, Yuki blinked. You want me to be like a babysitter? More than that, a mentor. A friend. Alexander's voice was sincere. You're exactly the kind of person I want around my daughter. That's really nice, but I don't have any qualifications. I'm not a teacher or a therapist or anything like that. You have something better than qualifications. You have a good heart. Alexander leaned forward. The night you found Sophie, you didn't see a rich man's daughter. You just saw a scared child who needed help. That's rare. That's valuable. Sophie had abandoned her coloring and was now standing next to Yuki's chair, watching her father with intense focus. What would this job involve exactly? Yuki asked. You'd move into our estate. We have staff quarters, very comfortable. You'd spend afternoons and evenings with Sophie. Help her with speech therapy exercises. Do activities with her. Just be a positive presence in her life. Weekends would be yours unless I'm traveling for business and need extra help. Move in? I can't just leave my grandmother alone. Alexander nodded like he'd expected this. I looked into your situation. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to understand your circumstances. Your grandmother needs regular medical care, correct? Yuki felt her defenses rise. That's private. I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I'm trying to help. If you take this position, your grandmother would be welcome to move into the estate as well. We have a guest house she could use. And our family physician would be available for her care, fully covered. Yuki's mouth went dry. Why would you do all that? Because Sophie hasn't connected with anyone like this in 2 years. Because you're good for her. And because I can afford to help, so why wouldn't I? It sounded too good to be true. In Yuki's experience, things that sounded too good to be true usually were. But Sophie was tugging on her sleeve now, making pleading gestures with her hands. Can I think about it? Yuki asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Yuki thought about it for 3 days. She talked to her grandmother, who surprisingly encouraged her to take the opportunity. That little girl needs you, Grandma had said. And we need the help. Pride doesn't pay medical bills, sweetie. So Yuki accepted. Moving into the Chen estate was surreal. The staff quarters were nicer than any apartment Yuki had ever lived in. Her grandmother's guest house had a garden and everything. For the first week, Yuki kept expecting someone to tell her there'd been a mistake. But Sophie made it impossible to feel like an outsider. They'd do homework together, practice speech exercises, play games. Yuki's sign language was getting better every day. A month passed, then 2. Yuki fell into a rhythm with Sophie, and it was the happiest she'd been in years. But not everyone was happy about the arrangement. Alexander had a fiancée. Her name was Victoria Hartley, from one of those old money families that went back generations. Yuki had seen her in magazines before, always dressed in designer everything, always looking perfect and cold. The first time they met in person, Victoria looked at Yuki like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "So you're the new help," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Sophie's companion," Yuki replied evenly. "Right, companion." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. How convenient that Alexander found someone so young and pretty to spend time around his daughter. Yuki felt her face heat up. "It's not like that." "Of course not." Victoria adjusted her diamond bracelet. "Just remember your place here. Your staff. Nothing more." After that, things got worse. Victoria would make little comments whenever she visited. She'd rearrange things Yuki had set up with Sophie, claiming they weren't appropriate. She'd criticize Yuki's clothes, her background, her education, always with that same fake smile. The other staff started treating Yuki differently too. Some were kind, but others seemed to resent her closeness with Sophie and Alexander. Rumors started spreading. People whispered that Yuki was trying to seduce Alexander, that she was a gold digger, that she'd manipulated her way into the family. Yuki tried to ignore it, but it was hard. Every day felt like walking through a minefield. She started second-guessing everything she did. Was she standing too close to Alexander when they discussed Sophie's progress? Was she dressing too nicely? Not nicely enough? Should she eat dinner with the family or stay in her quarters? Sophie noticed something was wrong. One evening she grabbed Yuki's hand and signed, "Sad?" "Why?" Yuki forced a smile. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just tired." But Sophie wasn't fooled. She signed something else. Something Yuki's limited sign language couldn't fully understand. When Yuki looked confused, Sophie grabbed a piece of paper and wrote in careful letters, "Victoria, mean to you." "I know, I see." Yuki's heart squeezed. "It's okay. Adults can handle mean people." Sophie shook her head firmly. She wrote again, "You stay. Please. Need you." That night, Yuki lay in bed wondering if she should leave. This wasn't her world. These people, this lifestyle, the constant judgment, it was exhausting. But every time she thought about packing her bags, she'd picture Sophie's face, those hopeful eyes, that careful handwriting saying, "Need you." The situation came to a head 2 weeks later at a charity gala Alexander was hosting at the estate. Yuki wasn't supposed to attend, she was just staff after all, but Sophie had a meltdown when it was time to get ready. She refused to go without Yuki. Alexander found them in Sophie's room, his daughter in tears clutching Yuki's hand. "What's wrong?" he asked, his formal bow tie already in place. Sophie signed frantically. Alexander's expression grew serious as he watched. "She wants Yuki to come to the gala," he translated. "She says she feels safe with you there." "I can't go to something like that," Yuki protested. I don't belong at fancy parties. Sophie thinks you belong. That's what matters to me." Alexander's tone left no room for argument. "I'll have something sent to your room to wear." "Please, Yuki, for Sophie." An hour later, Yuki stood in front of her mirror wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that probably cost more than her old car. Her hands were shaking as she walked into the ballroom, Sophie holding one hand and Alexander on the other side of his daughter. The stares started immediately. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who was that girl with the Chen family? Why was she holding Sophie's hand like she belonged there? Victoria appeared like a shark sensing blood in the water. She was stunning in a red gown that probably cost more than Yuki would make in 5 years. Her smile was sharp and dangerous. "Alexander, darling," Victoria said loudly, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Why is the help at our gala? Did someone forget to explain the guest list?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Sophie's hand tightened around Yuki's. Alexander's jaw clenched and Yuki realized that everything was about to change, one way or another. The ballroom fell silent. Every eye was on them. Yuki felt her face burning. She wanted to disappear, but Sophie's hand was squeezing hers so tightly and she couldn't abandon her. Alexander's expression turned cold. "Victoria, that's enough." "Enough?" Victoria laughed. "I'm just asking a reasonable question. Why is your daughter's babysitter dressed like a guest at our engagement party?" "This isn't your engagement party," Alexander said quietly. "It's a charity gala, and Yuki is here because Sophie asked her to be." "Oh, how sweet. The child gets whatever she wants now?" Victoria's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What's next, Alexander? Should we let her pick our wedding date too? Or maybe you'd rather marry the help instead?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Yuki felt like she'd been slapped. She tried to pull her hand away from Sophie's, tried to step back, but the little girl held on with surprising strength. "You need to leave." Alexander said to Victoria, his voice deadly calm. "Excuse me? You heard me. Leave. Now." Victoria's perfect face twisted with anger. "You're choosing her over me? Some nobody waitress who's probably been throwing herself at you for months. Victoria." Alexander's voice could have cut glass. "You just insulted someone who's shown more kindness to my daughter in 3 months than you've shown in 2 years. Someone who's never asked me for anything except to be allowed to help a child she cares about. So yes, I'm choosing her. I'm choosing anyone over someone who thinks it's acceptable to humiliate people for their background." The crowd was buzzing now. People were pulling out their phones. Yuki knew this would be all over social media within minutes. Victoria's face went pale, then red. "You'll regret this. My family, your family, has been bleeding my company dry for years. But that's over now. We're done. Please leave." Victoria looked around at all the watching faces, at the phones recording her public humiliation. For a moment, Yuki almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then Victoria's eyes landed on Yuki, filled with such pure hatred that Yuki actually took a step back. "You think you've won?" Victoria hissed. "You think you can just waltz into his life and play happy family? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing, and everyone here knows it." Before anyone could respond, Sophie did something nobody expected. She let go of Yuki's hand and stepped forward, standing between Victoria and her father, and then she opened her mouth. "Leave Maya alone." The words were rough, scratchy, barely more than a whisper, but they were words. Actual words. Out loud, the ballroom went dead silent. Sophie's eyes were shining with tears, but her little face was fierce. "She's not mean. You're mean." Her voice cracked on the words, clearly causing her pain to speak. "Maya loves me. She helps me. You never even look at me." Alexander dropped to his knees in front of his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "Sophie, baby, you're talking. You're actually talking." Sophie nodded, then turned to Yuki. When she spoke again, each word seemed to take effort. "Don't go. Please, need you." Yuki was crying now too. She knelt down beside Alexander and pulled Sophie into a hug. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise." The ballroom erupted in applause. People were crying, smiling, clapping. Victoria stood frozen for a moment, then turned and pushed her way through the crowd, disappearing into the night. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests kept coming up to congratulate Sophie on her breakthrough. Doctors and speech therapists in attendance were amazed. Alexander stayed close to his daughter all night, his hand on her shoulder like he was afraid she might disappear. Later, after the guests had left and Sophie was asleep, Yuki sat in the garden trying to process everything. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Alexander walking toward her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "It's your garden." He sat down on the bench beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night was quiet except for the sound of crickets and a distant fountain. "I'm sorry about Victoria," Alexander finally said. "What she said to you was unforgivable. It's fine. I'm used to people looking down on me. That doesn't make it okay." He turned to face her. "Yuki, you need to know something. The thing she said about you throwing yourself at me, about being a gold digger, none of that is true. And I don't believe it for a second. I know you don't. But I need you to know why." Alexander took a breath. "When Sophie had her accident, when she lost her voice, I thought I'd lost her completely. She shut down, stopped trying, stopped smiling. I hired the best therapists, the best doctors. Everyone said just give her time. But nothing worked. Nothing changed. Until you." Yuki looked at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "You gave me my daughter back," Alexander continued. "Not because you wanted something from me. Not because I was paying you, but because you genuinely care about her. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? She's easy to care about. Most people don't see that. They see the disability, the challenge, the complication. They see a broken child. You just saw Sophie." His voice broke slightly. "You saw her the same way you did that night in the rain. As someone worth stopping for." Yuki didn't know what to say. The air between them felt charged with something she didn't want to name. "I'm not good at this," Alexander said, "at saying what I feel. I've spent so long building walls, being careful, protecting Sophie and myself. But tonight, watching you stand there with her, watching her defend you, watching her speak for the first time in 2 years." He paused. "I realized something." "What?" "That I don't want you here just as Sophie's companion anymore." He looked directly at her. "I want you in our lives. really in our lives. As family, as he hesitated. As more than an employee, Yuki's heart was pounding. Alexander, I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because people like me don't end up with people like you. That's not how the world works. The world also said my daughter would never speak again. The world said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Yuki. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, something real could develop between us. Something beyond just Sophie. I can't think about this right now, Yuki said, standing up.
Tonight was too much.
Victoria, Sophie speaking, you ending your engagement, all of it. I need time. I understand. Alexander stood too. Take all the time you need.
But Yuki? Yeah?
Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide, I want you to know that you'll always have a place here. You and your grandmother. Sophie needs you, and that matters more than anything else. Yuki nodded and walked back to her quarters, her mind spinning. She checked on her grandmother, who was sleeping peacefully, then went to her own room. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the entire evening in her head. Sophie had spoken. Actually spoken. Defended her, called her Maya instead of Yuki, which somehow made it even more special. And Alexander had ended his engagement. Publicly. For her. No, not for her. For Sophie. Because Victoria had been cruel to someone his daughter loved. But then that conversation in the garden. The way he'd looked at her. The things he'd said. Yuki's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She opened it and her blood ran cold. You ruined my life tonight. I don't forget people who cross me. Watch your back. It was from Victoria. Yuki deleted the message, but she couldn't delete the chill that ran down her spine. She'd made an enemy tonight. A powerful, vindictive enemy. And she had no idea what that was going to mean for her future. But when she thought about Sophie's face, about those hard-won words, about the trust in that little girl's eyes, Yuki knew she'd do it all over again. Whatever came next, whatever Victoria had planned, it would be worth it. Because some people were worth fighting for, and Sophie Chen was definitely one of them. The next few weeks were strange. Sophie's voice grew stronger every day. She was talking, really talking. Her speech therapist called it a miracle. But while Sophie was thriving, Yuki was struggling. Victoria's threat kept echoing in her mind. She jumped at unexpected sounds. She checked over her shoulder constantly. Then things started happening. Her car had flat tires twice in 1 week. Her work locker was broken into. Small things that added up to one message. Someone was watching. Yuki didn't tell Alexander. He was dealing with enough, handling the fallout from his broken engagement, managing business deals that Victoria's family was trying to sabotage. She didn't want to add to his stress with her paranoid theories. But Sophie noticed. Kids always do. You scared, Sophie said one afternoon during their homework time. Her words were getting clearer, more confident. Why? I'm not scared, sweetie. Just tired, Sophie shook her head. She was too smart for lies. Victoria, she hurt you? Yuki's breath caught. No, honey, she hasn't hurt me. But she want to. It wasn't a question. Before Yuki could respond, Alexander appeared in the doorway. Sophie, can you give me and Yuki a minute? Sophie looked between them, worried, but nodded and went to her room. Alexander closed the door and turned to Yuki. I know about the threats. The flat tires. The locker. The anonymous emails to HR claiming you're inappropriate with Sophie. Yuki felt sick. There are emails about me? All lies. All traced back to Victoria's lawyer. I'm filing a restraining order today. Alexander, I can just leave. This isn't worth all this trouble. You're not leaving. You're not running because someone's trying to bully you. He took her hand. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But trust was hard when you'd spent your whole life learning that good things don't last. I'm trying, she whispered. That's all I ask. 2 days later, Victoria showed up at the estate. She somehow got past the front gate. Probably charmed one of the newer security guards. Yuki was in the garden with Sophie when she appeared, looking disheveled and desperate. We need to talk, Victoria said, her voice sharp. Yuki stood up, putting herself between Victoria and Sophie. You need to leave. There's a restraining order. I don't care about the restraining order. You took everything from me. My fiancé, my reputation, my future. You did that to yourself when you chose to be cruel to a child. Victoria's face twisted with anger. She took a step forward and Yuki's heart started pounding. But before anything could happen, Alexander appeared with 2 security guards. Victoria, you're trespassing. You need to leave now or I'm calling the police. You really chose her over me? Victoria's voice broke. For the first time, she looked less angry and more broken. I loved you, Alexander. We had plans. No, you loved my money and my status. You never loved me. You certainly never loved my daughter. Alexander's voice softened slightly. Victoria, I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm trying to protect my family. But you need help, real help, and you need to leave us alone. Victoria looked at Sophie, then at Yuki, then back at Alexander. Something in her expression changed. The fight went out of her. I hope she's worth it. She turned and walked away. Yuki watched her go, feeling relief and pity. Victoria had everything and lost it because she couldn't see what mattered. Sophie tugged on Yuki's shirt. She's gone now? Yes, sweetie. She's gone. Good. Sophie hugged Yuki's waist. You stay forever now? Yuki looked at Alexander. Yeah, I think I might. 3 months passed. Victoria hadn't contacted them again. She'd moved to Europe, from what Alexander heard through mutual connections. The threats stopped. Life settled into something that felt almost normal, except nothing was normal anymore. Not for Yuki, she'd fallen in love. Slowly, carefully, terrifyingly in love with Alexander Chen. And she was pretty sure he felt the same way. There were the small touches that lasted a bit too long. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The conversations that stretched late into the night after Sophie went to bed. But neither of them had said anything. Neither had crossed that line, until one evening when Sophie, clever little matchmaker that she was becoming, decided to take matters into her own hands. I have idea, Sophie announced at dinner. What's that, baby? Alexander asked. Yuki should be my real mom, not just friend. The room went silent. Yuki nearly choked on her water. Alexander looked stunned. Sophie, Yuki started. That's not really how it works. Why not? Sophie's voice was clear and strong now, so different from those first whispered words. You love me. I love you. Daddy loves you too. I see it. Sophie, Alexander said gently, but his daughter wasn't done. You look at her like Grandma say Grandpa looked at her, like she's most important person, like you want to keep her forever. Sophie turned to Yuki. And you look at Daddy same way, when you think nobody watching. Yuki felt her face burning. I don't. You do, Sophie said simply. So why not be family for real? Alexander was trying not to smile. She's got a point. Alexander, Yuki warned. He stood up and walked around the table to where Yuki sat. Sophie watched with barely contained excitement. She does have a point, Alexander said again. We've been dancing around this for months now. Being careful, being appropriate, waiting for the right time. He knelt down beside Yuki's chair. But maybe there's no such thing as the right time. Maybe you just know. Know what? Yuki's voice was barely a whisper. That you found your person. That someone who started as a stranger in the rain has become the most important part of your life. He took her hand. I love you, Yuki. I'm not asking you to marry me right this second. But I'm asking you to stop being just Sophie's companion. Stop living in the staff quarters. Stop pretending this is just a job. Be part of our family. Really part of it. Yuki's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Of what? Of waking up and finding out this isn't real. That I'm still that tired waitress walking home in the rain and all of this was just a dream. Alexander smiled and wiped a tear from her cheek. Then let me prove it's real. Every day. For the rest of our lives if you'll let me. Sophie couldn't contain herself anymore. Say yes. Please say yes. Yuki laughed through her tears. She looked at this little girl who'd changed her entire life. And at this man who saw her as more than where she came from. She thought about her grandmother, healthy and happy in her cottage, about the life she'd built here, the family she'd found. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Sophie squealed and jumped up to hug them both. Alexander pulled Yuki into his arms, and for the first time in her life, Yuki felt completely, perfectly home. A year later, Yuki stood in a simple white dress in the same garden where she'd once sat in fear. Her grandmother was in the front row, crying happy tears. Sophie stood beside her as junior bridesmaid, speaking clearly into the microphone as she did a reading about love and family. Alexander looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. because to him she was. The little girl Yuki had comforted in the rain was now her daughter. The man who'd watched from the shadows had become her husband. And the scared, tired waitress who'd almost kept walking that night had become someone who knew, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes life changes in an instant. Sometimes all it takes is one choice to stop and help. One moment of kindness to a stranger, one rainy night that changes everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, the girl who had nothing gets everything she never knew she needed, all because she chose to see a scared child who needed comfort and didn't walk away.